Well, let's kick this thing off officially. Welcome to the Profitable Steward Podcast. We're privileged to have Jeffrey Mundell here as our guest speaker today. And for those that are attending live here, you just stay muted. We can converse a little bit in the chat, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A towards the end, and then some informal Q&A after we cut the recording for those who want to stay on for a few more minutes. Um, we have been privileged to have Bob Kinford and crew here with us this week and learning about stockmanship. And it's neat to see how everybody puts their own unique twist on things, but we're kind of after the same goal. And I think sometimes we paint ourselves into a box too much and we say, okay, this is how it has to be done. This is how much stock density we need to have to be able to regenerate soil. This is how often the cattle need to move. You've got to use electric fence if you're actually going to regenerate. And so I've definitely been challenged. My paradigms have been challenged here, and I've tried to literally forget the things that I know so that I could open up space and be able to learn. And so that's our invitation here, maybe during this conversation is, maybe set aside some of those preconceived paradigms, allow space for some new seeds to be planted. And, if they grow and bear fruit, keep them. And if not, you certainly don't have to. And so I think we're going to maybe have some paradigms challenged here. But Jeffrey, welcome. Tell these guys where you're calling in from.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm calling in from San Juan Bautista, California. I manage the Gabilan Cattle Company, and it's above Joe Morris's place, which you guys had him on the podcast. And so we're at the top of that mountain where he's at the base of it. And we're in an annual grassland, essentially. And so we're a cow-calf operation, and I've been here managing the place for about 10 years, a little over 10 years. And it's been a really interesting ride for sure.
Very good. Very good there. Well, yeah, we'll kind of let you run with it, do a little bit of monologue here, and then we can kind of steer the conversation based on comments and things. But so yeah, take it and run.
Well, it's been a really interesting place ranching in California. A lot of these big land open spaces are pretty sought after because the biggest threat to rangelands in California is conversion. And so we're losing all these ranches pretty quickly. They're getting chewed up and turned into vineyards or houses or a lot of other uses, solar farms, you name it. Most of the large intact, this is the middle of a Mexican land grant. They used to be 49,000 acres, and there's 500 acres left of it in the middle, which is the highest peak of the Gabilan Range here, Fremont Peak. And they've got a conservation easement with the Nature Conservancy. And so what seems to be happening a lot in California is land trusts are gathering up land and fee hold title. They're trying to get as much open space gathered up as possible so that it can hold the line because it's going very quickly. So we have a conservation easement with the Nature Conservancy here. And what's happened is over the last 10 years, we kind of really embraced bringing people onto the ranch, where the way I was raised and the people I was around most in the ranching communities, you don't dare let anybody behind your gate because they're going to start to put restrictions on you or tell you what to do. And we don't have time for that. We don't have money for that. And so anytime anybody was at the gate and wanted a thing, we'd run them off pretty steady. And then we got here, I started managing the Gabilan, and there was a little different feel to it. There was a little more collaboration and a little more of a desire to try to understand how to utilize outside help in terms of inventory. And so we brought on pretty early on after I was here, Point Blue Conservation Science, and they came on to help us establish data points and to essentially give us an eco system kind of function health check. And so what that did was they started to do, I think, 52 data points on the ranch, and they do plant spacing, plant species richness. They do soils testing at carbon. They do at shallow and at depth. They do bird counts. So we have infiltration tests. So we have a series of tests to kind of showcase how our ecosystem was functioning, and that was about 8 years ago. And they came with a baseline, and it kind of just showcased what was here. And then over the last 8 years, we've been able to get a few more tests done with them. And so I think we're on our third data set now, because it takes time. I think it's every couple of years for plants and birds, and then soils is every 5 years. And so we started to build this data set. And then what started to happen was, because we have a conservation easement with the Nature Conservancy, over time, the ecosystem health started to improve. They started to see some interesting things on the landscape, one of which was an explosion of our native perennial bunch grasses, which is our purple needlegrass and our giant creeping rye and our oat grass, which are native perennials that, if anybody knows about California, you don't really see them very much anymore. And through all the things I tried to learn, because I jumped on board when I came to this ranch, they're the ones who kind of asked me to start doing holistic plant grazing, and I didn't know what it was. And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole. And in learning that, I made every mistake you can make. I bunched cattle too tight. I got poor gains on them. I got poor breed ups. I did started putting cattle all together in one spot, and just wasn't enough water. We're spring fed ranch. So, I ran into all the weak links really quickly on this landscape, and then essentially just started checking them off the box. And we started just working on improvements, water improvements mainly. I've just got off a bulldozer, and we're putting in a big water project right now. And I'll probably be doing that till the day I die, because there's just so many places that you can put cattle if you can give them a drink of water. And so this is a really interesting ranch. It's really steep. We're 3,000 feet on the highest point, and then we'll drop down to 700 feet on our lowest point. And so we've got some really big, steep grassland plateaus on this place, and then we fall off into coastal chaparral and into the brush. And so these cattle are interesting. We have a closed herd. They've been closed for about 9 years. So we retain our bulls, we pick and select our heifers. Everything's been kept back to try to fit this landscape. So we've got a pretty small framed cow. She's an commercial Angus cow, but she's just been closed herd. So she's adapted over the generations to fit this landscape. We'll have 1,000-pound cow. And she's works the country, knows the country, and it works really well for us. What we found was, over time, starting to put myself into different conversations other than ranching, and going into wildlife talks and into bird watcher talks, and starting to learn about the really special things on this landscape, has helped me understand and capture a new appreciation for what we can do in terms of kind of help the ecosystem. And what we're finding is, through the last 10 years of kind of looking at this landscape almost like a wildlife refuge, we're now in a really good position, because of all of the rare species that have thrived on this landscape, to walk into those hard conversations that are pretty anti-ranching with a data set that I can drop on the table and be able to say, cool story, we're not going to move the cows off this place. We're going to bring in more grazers, and then we're going to add periodic disturbances in different areas for these reasons. And so what that's done is essentially give me an understanding as my role as a steward of the landscape. And then it's also showcased to people who have land trusts and non-for-profit organizations, that now we're in an interesting position, because we've done a lot of the work, and we have such a wild landscape that they're starting to open up kind of their ears and have us in the conversations to help them manage their landscapes. Essentially, we're on our ranches and we're in terrariums. We're just in our own little terrarium, and the glass of that terrarium is our fence line. But wildlife don't move like that. Wildlife don't know about fence lines. And so if we can start to figure out here in California how we can create wildlife connectivity and utilize domestic grazers to maintain those corridors, we're getting some really interesting conversations going. Plus, California's on fire. We've got one of the most historical fires raging right now in California. And so there's a big scramble for answers on how they're going to deal with the vegetation management policies that have failed in the past. So here on the Gabilan, it's been really interesting because of what we've been able to do, utilizing holistic plant grazing and AMP grazing, and our ability to put cows where they need to be for the right reasons has kind of opened a lot of interesting doors for us. And I think it was Dave Pratt who said, you can have a short duration of unsustainable energy to create a sustainable business or something along those lines. And we have done that. I hit full burnout about 2 years ago, but we've finally tipped over that edge where now things are looking up really well. And even by accident, we've ended up in this really interesting position of being kind of a lighthouse for what we can do to kind of keep a place wild using domestic livestock. We have California condors, and they are very rare. California condors, I want to say there's only a couple hundred of them left. And, we always had a boneyard where we'd haul off our dead cattle and we'd hide them and didn't want to see them and put them down where predators wouldn't get them. And then we started changing that practice and putting them on open hilltops. And it was a really yucky feeling for me because I didn't like to see it. I didn't want to deal with it, and everything in my hair stood up because I thought I was making the wrong decision. But we started to do that anytime we get, we have feral hogs here. Anytime we get those killed or any kind of carcass from if a cow got stuck in the mud or something happened, stillborn calves, you name it, and we'd put it up there on the hilltop. And then we got a call from Pinnacles. My partner's the one who she thought that was the way to attract condors, California condors. And she was right, because they started to come onto those carcasses. And what that did was now we have a nesting pair of California condors on the ranch. And we got a call from Pinnacles State Park, and they said that we have a collared, because all those condors are collared essentially. And so their equipment showcased that their behavior was showcasing that they had a nest here. And so they came out with their team, they located the nest and confirmed that we've been able to get them to stick around. And so what that's done for us is really kind of put us up on the tier in terms of having conversations for endangered species and our role in providing habitat. And so most of the way that I was raised was if there was something endangered or something to be worried about, we didn't mess with it. We didn't take pictures of it. We didn't tell anybody it's even on our place because that could lend to headaches. And over time, that's changed now where I'm taking pictures of all of those and I am proud that they are here and I am celebrating them being here. And the data showcases that they are here because of what we are doing as ranchers and as stewards. We are creating habitat with this herd and its periodic disturbance. And these sensitive species have evolved with that herd pressure over time, whether it was wild ungulates or domestic livestock. And so now that they're thriving and looking really robust here, it's kind of a show place for people like the Nature Conservancy to bring their kind of high-end donors and people who and their scientists to kind of showcase what a healthy working lands looks like. And so we're really proud of that. And a lot of it happened by accident. It was just doing things and developing an intuition as a steward. And so even those happy accidents, and we mess up all the time, and we have things that are going to need healed up, or we may hit a water point too hard, or that's all part of it. And it's also okay where it took Point Blue conservation scientists. Mel came on and Mel gave me a really good, she's the ecologist. And if I thought I did something wrong in the landscape, Mel would showcase where I built habitat for a special animal. And that was really nice to hear from someone who thought I just did something wrong. And so over time, it's helped me build confidence and understand that this type of disturbance adds life every time we do it. And if we do it right and allow it to recover, you're just going to see so many interesting animals. And so, what I would suggest to a lot of people is just embrace that wild part of your landscape that scares you a little bit. And we're all programmed as cattle ranchers and livestock owners that if it potentially can threaten your livestock, it's probably a bad thing. But there may be a way to coexist. There may be a way to also capitalize on that in terms of whether it be environmental capital or actual dollars. So we have a elk herd here now. They just opened up this zone for tags. Elk are worth a lot of money right now. They're worth quite a few cattle. So knowing that we've created habitat for that, there's potential for an ability to capitalize on that. So kind of speaking about just embracing that and go into places that you don't feel good to gain perspective. Go to all those places that, they're serving kale for lunch and it's just a weird feel, but you're going to walk out of there different and with a little different perspective. And it kind of helped me develop a little bit of an understanding, and especially how to talk to people in this area who are, a lot of them are in echo chambers in terms of cattle ranching, and to be able to have that conversation and then bring them to the ranch and show the wildness of this place has been something that's opened a lot of doors for us. And I think it's going to ensure our future in ranching because we're doing it to add more life and in a way that's measurable. And I think that's something that a lot of us ranchers are so busy trying to keep our critters alive and trying to get them to market. But if you can just stop and remember how wild we are as people in terms of ranching and herding people, I think it's going to maybe help your landscape long term to just stop and look around at all the little critters that we have a tendency to just walk over all day long. But anyway, that's kind of where I wanted to talk about it and just kind of share my experience. And I understand how scary that all sounds to a lot of people. But we've seen, just as kind of an example of what can happen with collaboration, we've been able to do that. And there's headaches. We have interns coming up from Stanford to do vegetation monitoring with drones, and you got to figure out how to take care of them, get them squared away, and it's going to take time out of your day and things like that.
Perfect. There was a question in the chat about size and scale, and is it all contiguous? And then also with that, a lot of your country is more used seasonally, but are your cattle there year round?
Yeah. So our cattle are here year round, cow-calf operation. And so what we'll do is we spring and fall calve. And so we'll start calving in late January. Calves will start hitting the ground here. And then calves will start hitting the ground in the fall about September 2nd. We'll start seeing calves. And then we'll jump stuff around depending on how it's shaped up, because this annual grassland is really interesting. And then our landscape is even more challenging. So we'll send our young cattle down to Piscinus Ranch, which is down below us, and we trail them off the back of the ranch, and they'll go down there for the winter. We've done it a few times. They buy a lot of our cattle and they feed them through their kitchen. They do weddings and all sorts of things there. It's a really neat place, Piscinus Ranch. But they'll buy a lot of it, finish our cattle on their perennial irrigated pivot ground, and then they'll put them through their kitchens. We're pretty much a cow-calf operation up here, meaning we just make calves up here. Their grass comes on down there in Piscinus in January. It can hit fast growth sometimes. Here, we won't see fast growth on this ranch in terms of our annual grasses until end of April. And so our grass will shut off sometimes beginning of June. So we essentially have about a full month of good banging grass up here. And then you better hunker down because it shuts off and your cattle are gonna start to slip and go backwards. So we have a real small window to get a calf on the ground, get that calf growing good, get that mother healed up enough to get rebred, and then essentially lock it all down for the summer because everything pretty well shuts off. So this, we'll go from 17, 18% protein on our spring grass, and then we'll shut off to below 5% pretty quick. And so once the seed falls off these annual grasses, there's not a whole lot of protein on here. And so what we'll do is we'll start putting some protein out to them. We'll do a urea protein out so that they can still utilize this dry annual grass, and that balances their gut, keeps them going through the summer, and the cows can stay up in pretty good shape from then. And then that's essentially how it works. And then we'll wean those calves here pretty quick, and then they'll head down to Piscinas Ranch in the fall, and then get them off the place as quick as we can, so they can keep growing down there. Essentially, that's how it works. But yeah, it's a real short grass season up here, real hard on cattle. If you bring outside cattle in out here, they'll just fall apart. It's just kind of how it works up here because it's so steep, and most of this ranch isn't fenced. If I bring stalkers in, they just leave the country, and it's just all she wrote. So it's kind of relegated to home cows that know the country, and we're in growth phase right now, which is tough because the market's so high. So we're just trying to hit our marks and then retain every heifer we can to continue to grow through this high price time. So because we want these cows here that know the country really well, because our water's spread out and it's real low volume water, and so they got to know where it's at.
Yeah. The question also is, does the perennial grass hold its protein longer?
Yeah, the perennials are really great. They do good to balance the gut enough so that these cattle can kind of continue to use the lignified grass. The trouble is I don't have the volume, so there's just not if I built like a 20-acre paddock and the dry times and threw 400 or 500 head in there, it just isn't enough perennial grass on that land base in that paddock to balance the gut enough. But the goal is to get it to shift to that point, or eventually, potentially, we can wean off of those supplements and then allow those to do what they're supposed to do and balance that gut out.
Yeah. How rapidly are you seeing that happen, the shift from annual to perennial?
It's pretty fast. What we're finding is all the things that I learned about getting perennial grasses to establish has kind of gone out the window for a lot of ways. So for us here, leaving stuff behind doesn't really help our native perennial grasses. So what I'm learning about purple needlegrass is it loves everything else pounded down to the ground. And then you just do it really quickly, pound that grass down with hooves and mouths and get it just tight to the soil surface as you can, and then get off of it for a pretty long rest. So then it goes really good, and it really starts to expand really well. If I leave a lot of standing residual dry matter, it doesn't do a whole lot. It's pretty shy grass. It just doesn't want to go unless it's got the whole canopy to kind of thrive. So, and it seems like it needs just a very little amount of litter on the soil surface to be able to jump up and capture sunlight. It doesn't like that. So if you leave too much there, it just doesn't seem to like it, and it won't really go. So what we find is you'll kind of scorch it in terms of you'll lay that grass down with ultra high densities, or as high as we can get, which isn't that much, 400,000 pounds of the acre maybe, to kind of get them so they can get gut fill and kind of keep moving. But I'll tighten them up as much as I can in the spring. I've gotten close to 1 million pounds to the acre, and that works really well on a small window of time here. Essentially, we have to open the country up so they can fill their guts when it dries off and they can get to water. And so we try to do as much as we can to get the impact, but it really likes the impact here. We're on granitic soils, so compaction's not an issue. We can stack them in as tight as we can. It's just keeping them, that tight for that long is kind of been the trick. And then, breeding season, I don't know how a lot of people do it in breeding season, but you can tighten a paddock up pretty tight. But if you're on a real steep slope, those bulls just ride your cows right down through your electric fence, and you get to regather tomorrow. So that's kind of what I've learned. But yeah, so there's kind of a sweet spot in terms of paddock size that the bulls won't knock the fences down. And you really kind of got to lay your fences out in a place where it's almost on the uphill side of things if you can, because that whole herd will fall down on it if it's steep enough, and you end up having to pick a lot of fence up.
And how often are you moving? I know that depends, right? But
yeah, it depends. But in the spring, we'll do about a 10-acre paddock with 350, 400 head, and we'll move them every 24 hours. And that seems to work good. And then as it starts to harden up, we'll just kind of continue that on as much as we can. 20 acres will be once it starts to yellow off a little bit. Try to keep them in 20-acre paddocks. I just got out of that last about 15 days ago, I guess, because I went to a paddock where there wasn't very much water, and making lanes to that steep a country is tough. So once it dries off and you start making water lanes, you're going to see pneumonia because they're walking those lanes to dust them up too much. And most of these ranches, they find a spring and then they develop a trough down below it. Well, that trough's usually in kind of a low sinkhole, and that'll be a dust hole that just makes pneumonia happen. So we've been developing water to get them up out of the trees and up out of the places where the crossbreeds can happen, and that takes that dust away from those cattle while they're bedded under the oak trees, and they're not just sitting there by a water trough in a hole and just breathing that all day.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
We'll kind of shift gears a little bit here. So I mentioned, Bob Kinford's here, and it was neat to see that the manager for the Nevada Gold Mine sent his crew over today of cowboys.
Yeah.
And there's kind of this marriage, I think, that is, well, not a marriage yet, maybe. Maybe there's a courtship between regenerative grazers and the cowboy culture, and I think you're in the middle of that. Can you speak to that a little bit about the role of the cowboy? Because, I mean, you're pretty punchy, and you gotta watch your video with your fancy glasses. And
yeah, I got my new glasses, got my Donny goggles. My buddy did
stuff. So I mean, but you're regenerative, and you speak the lingo of the environmentalists, and so maybe talk a little bit about both sides and how we can help to join those sides together.
Well, essentially it's a culture that I love, that I was brought up, people taught it to me. I find it to be really relevant and special here. And the more we can kind of, like, I have these video goggles that a friend of mine, and that's what's amazing here is I'm surrounded. I can see Silicon Valley right here. And so the maker of Meta glasses, of Facebook and Meta, they essentially, a friend of theirs gave me a pair of those glasses. And so I'm in this really weird place where I get to just put on a pair of glasses handed to me by the person who invented them, and then we go out and rope calves. Like, that's just what's going to happen. So they get to showcase kind of what our life looks like from kind of the saddle, and I think it's really sought after, and it seems like people really enjoy that type of perspective because it showcases the kind of the need to be able to handle cattle without infrastructure. Because when we start to get out of our terrariums and link all these landscapes together, it's going to take all of us ranchers in a network figuring out where impact needs to happen, either to reduce fire fuel loads or go help someone manage their non-for-profit or their land trust. And so it's going to take going into places with no fences, no infrastructure, and it's going to take people horseback doing it, I think. And I'm really trying to position to be that.
Yeah, that's good. And we appreciate that, and it's neat to see that culture is still alive, and that and it is needed. I mean, it's good. So you mentioned, that like the quote by Dave Pratt, you can't build a sustainable business on unsustainable effort, something to that effect. And
Yeah.
And I think, just to be vulnerable here, 2 weeks ago our cows hit a patch of larkspur, and it's been all hands on deck. Here we are thinking we're doing a great thing, putting cattle up on the very top of the mountain just to see them start tipping over.
Yeah.
And you feel like, man, why did I choose to do this business?
Yeah.
It's just kind of one of those things that, we're getting through with a lot of help, a lot of prayer, and neighborly help from sometimes hours away that are coming.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the burnout, those things are really real. Can you talk a little bit about what helped you to get through that and um, see the light?
Well, it took perspective. So I realized that my value was determined by my cowboy hat and my, I had, if I walked into a room, I was this thing instead of realizing that I'm just of value as a person. And so I'm not just a cowboy. Like I didn't understand that I just identified as my role or my job. And so it took finding hobbies and doing other things that weren't ranch related. And then, so I love ranching and I'll work myself to death on it. And it's something that um, I think you'll find with a lot of managers is they love to do this. And so hours aren't really calculated because it's your passion, and so you're, whether I'm fixing a fence or fixing a toilet or whatever on this landscape, building a road, it's just fun to do. And it's all really difficult. And so, and then you run into enough things. We had that big winter a couple winters ago, and we had oaks falling down right and left and cows underneath them. And we were digging out cattle off of landslides, and we had just wreck after wreck. And I pulled a live cow out of a full oak tree that had tumbled down the side of a cliff and lit in the middle of an oak tree. And I mean, you're just riding out there and you look up and you see a live cow look down and out of an oak tree, and you're like, what in the world? And so, yeah, those things have happened, and in ways that are, it's taken me down to my knees enough times now where all I can do is try to really trust my gut, because I think in a lot of those things, a little voice told me to worry about it, but I was too tired to worry about it. So where I was just, it'll be fine. And then I've gotten myself in a couple spots where I'm like, dang it, I knew I should have went and did that, or should have went and checked that. Or, there's just this little voice inside you that has gotten really loud now, to where when it starts to talk, I just go do it now. And people are like, why are you doing that, all that effort? And it's like, well, I know what's coming because that voice told me there's a train wreck on the other end of this deal. And so I'm getting better at kind of feeling that. But then when curveballs come, which they come all the time here, so we'll have an earthquake and we'll have a good spring and we'll have 300 cows on that spring. And we'll have an earthquake and that spring will stop for about 2 weeks. And those cows were standing right on it. And I'm like, and I'll walk up the next day and it'll be not a drop coming out of it. And so things have happened like that where I've had to pick up and drive cows. And it's so steep here that when they're down deep in these canyons and they get thirsty, it's a chore to get them up out, because everything down below our fence line is farm ground or vineyards, or it all smells like water, And so to try to drive thirsty cows up a steep thing has just really taught me a lot about myself. And that's happened early on when I was first here, but it was a lot of trying to figure out how to make it all make sense. And then over time, it's just been put water in the ground, put places, where you can keep out of a jackpot. If I have a potential for a halfway wet winter, the trouble about up here is you can get winter down below and everybody's getting big grass and it's nice warm rains, but you come up here, it's frozen rain, it's that freezing rain, and everything's just hunkered down looking like they're just getting pelted. And so it can be freezing rain up here for 2 weeks straight, and that is so hard on a cow here, because not only is she walking through mud at that point because everything's slick and sloping, she can't go out and graze much because she stayed underneath the trees because that freezing rain just got her drove in. So a couple weeks of that, you got a pretty weak cow that's got to be, and so just trying to figure out ways to where you're ready for all that to happen. And I've seen it happen enough now where I just have so many backup plans to kind of save that wreck. They're small, they're short little duration wrecks, but they happen so fast. You're talking about larkspur, and we've got situations down here where we've got poison hemlock, and you'll put them in, they'll go break in through a fence to a riparian area, and then they're just on poison hemlock, and you all of a sudden you see calves just livers tipping over, and you're like, oh no, we got trouble. So it happens fast. Early in the spring, we'll get nitrate poisoning on green because everything will melt off here, and you have short green grass, and then you'll have your best, young critter all of a sudden will be laying on its side, and you got to go get it in and get it stood back up. But so we have things, I've seen enough of those wrecks where, and I try to be real open about that, because most of the places you go, there's a lot of people telling you how great regenerative ag is and all the things that they've done and all the wonderful parts of it. But there's a lot of train wrecks to trying to make that thing work, because essentially you're rebuilding a plane while you're flying it, and so you're trying to do this unconventional stuff in a conventional system, and it's really difficult because you can do too much and it can show up 6 months later in your breed up or something. And so being careful about change has been really important to us. Now we move slow, we move careful, and really realize that we're not going to recognize the benefit of this for another year potentially, and so be kind of ready for that.
Yeah, we all go through it, right? The old adage, if you have livestock, you're going to have dead stock. And I mean,
that's always a blow. And then of course my partner's like, well, let's feed it to the condors, and she's all chipper, and I'm like, that's not the right mood I'm in at all. I'm like, I don't want to hear about that. So it's just interesting, but it's taken a lot, and it's been burnout, and then being able to step back and know that I'm burning out. And what that looks like to me is burnout to me looks like I come home and I sit down and I'm disconnected from everything. So there could be people talking in the room and I don't hear them. Burnout looks different. It could be scattered, or it could be me just never being able to pull out of thinking about what I have to do. And if I can't pull out and concentrate and be present in the moment, I'm probably suffering for some form of mild burnout. And that just tells me that I need to step away for a minute and get my mind right. And your body, what I learned was being in ranching, when you go so hard, it takes your body about 3 days to realize you're even trying to heal it up or rest. Like, it doesn't know how to be still. And so even if you try to sleep in one day, it won't let you, and so your body doesn't believe a word you're saying to it. It's like, we're going to rest and repair. We're going to do what do they say? Self-care. We're going to take some time. And then all of a sudden your body's like, yeah, right. And so it takes longer than you think for your body to actually stop and dump it all out and heal it up, because you got to dump all that out because you carry it around, and it just ends up showing up as mild back pain or a headache or a tight jaw, and then all of a sudden your whole body's kind of tight and falling apart. And that's just, I think, burnout, and it's just realizing that it's okay to step away for a minute. And then we've got enough systems in place now and people that are watching out, and the people that own this place are incredible. I can say, hey, I'm burning out. I need you to catch this for a couple of days, and I got to go stare at the floor, and I can't leave the house. Like, if I leave the house, everything about this landscape's talking to me. So I have to feel like I'm doing something. So when I just essentially am just like, I'm going to sit here quietly for 2 days and not do anything. And so it's taken a lot to reach that point, but it's starting to feel a lot better. And I'm able to keep it together for a lot longer, and just realize that it's coming, and going, oh, I can feel this coming. And then everybody jumps on board when they feel it, because, nobody's trying to not work enough here. It's just the way it is,
Yeah, I appreciate you going there. That's important. I mean, we talk about, high intensity, short duration grazing. The system isn't made to do that every day, right? There has to be space in that recovery period. And that is an integral part of any grazing plan, is the recovery period. But yet, as business owners and ranchers and entrepreneurs and cowboys and people who pride ourselves on how many hours we work and how early we get up in the morning, we forget that recovery period for ourselves. So it's necessary, and high performance athletes understand that. They have times when it's game day, they have training days, they have recovery days, and those recovery days, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's pretty much the mindset is, how do I, and then, start taking care of yourselves, like, going and getting to the chiropractor, going and getting a massage. Like, that's the weirdest thing. It feels weird to go do those things, but after you're done, you're like, I'm 20 again, all of a sudden you're shaking it all off, and I can touch my toes, or, it's like, it's interesting if you can start to figure out and there's a lot of stuff that you can just buy to take care of yourself, and we just don't. We treat ourselves pretty poorly compared to the livestock we care for, and so it's kind of like, start treating ourselves at least like the livestock we care for, and we'll be in pretty good shape,
Yeah, it's good. Well, a couple other questions in here, and then we'll wrap it up. Who have been your mentors, either in life in general, in the agriculture cowboy space, who comes to mind of people that have been influential in your life?
Yeah, I think most of the influences I've had were, on the horsemanship side, it was the Dorrances. Dorrances live the next mountain range over on Mount Toro. They're actually Leslie Dorrance, who passed away. She's the one who put my name in the hat for this job, and so they were big. They're really big influences on me, still are. And Steve Dorrance is over there, and he's just, I mean, he's just one of those kind of people you can talk to about anything, and they're just full of wisdom, and the way that they talk calms your nervous system, and you can hear them really well. And they just, a fella could, if a fella wanted to try this, and you're going, okay, I get it. Like, and so he always has a great story, and he's always been really good to me because he knows I'm kind of like a border collie. I'm kind of pretty high strung, but he knows that I'm going to mature out of it. So he's always gets a kick out of, we get together and just get a kick out of each other. But I just love him to death, and he's just an amazing human. And Leslie was amazing human too. Same thing. She just could see around all my flaws, it seemed like, which was really, really neat. So that family's been incredible. And then, the Brannemans have been incredible in terms of horsemanship. I've really followed the work of Buck Branneman and his whole family, and Riata and Gabe, and they've just been incredible. And so, and then there was I think one of my early influences was a guy by the name of Ed Machado, who just passed away, and he was in California. And he was the guy that kind of took me in when I was a kid and from town, and he worked for Flying U for Cotton Rosser for years, and he could do anything. The guy was just so handy, and he could run cows anywhere, and he'd lease it up and get some panels, and he'd figure it out, and it was always just chaos. But one of the neatest humans on the planet, but just a crude kind of cowboy, but just a big heart, and just their ability to just stop and take in kind of lost kids and be patient with them. And everybody just knows I was going to work out of it. It's just been really interesting in the ranching culture. They go, cool story. It's like when somebody brings you a horse from town and you're on a big place, you're like, and they tell you how high strung he is. It's like, yeah, sure. We'll go over that next hill and then he'll be different, and so pretty much just been taking me over the next hill, and I'm getting there, I think.
Yeah. What about books that you influential in your life?
Really, Johann Zimon's book. I really like Man, Cattle, and Veld. That's a really good one. I really like following Jaime Elizondo's stuff, and I really am careful and scared, probably is the word. I'm always scared of these really great grazers that aren't in California. You know how that it's like everything I've learned in regenerative ags from somewhere it rains or somebody at, something that has a different kind of program. So I'm always kind of scared, but I went full on trying all those things, and I learned a lot from it. And so it's been really interesting.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, we appreciate you being on here. I said two more questions. I would like to ask a question too. What do you recommend for somebody who wants to get started? Like, I get that question often. I don't own any land, but I love the ranching culture.
Yeah.
How do I get started?
I think learning about ecosystem services and then understanding really kind of the value that you bring to a landscape will get you access to land. What I'm seeing here is there are a lot of land trusts, a lot of conservation organizations. There are not a lot of managers and not a lot of on the ground people who know how to manage large landscapes. And so if you can learn wherever you want to end up, learn everything you can about it. And then over time, you'll start to utilize livestock and fire and ways to manage that landscape. That'll give you a ton of access to the land, which has been essentially what's happened here is, I don't own any land, but I'm able to steward this incredible place for the owners and it's the Boyle, Reeves, and Baldacci families that own this, and they don't live here. But they entrust it to me to do that. And so it's been really interesting over the last 10 years to be able to have access to such a beautiful place and not own a thing, so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, that never been a greater opportunity for a young person who has the desire to be able to go out there and with, the baby boomers retiring, and there's this whole shift that's happening in ownership. Individuals who want people to pass it on to, maybe their children don't want it, but they don't want to sell it. So go gain those skills. Go intern. Go. One of the young men here this week is from Australia. Just eager to learn, hungry. Went down and worked with Alejandro Carrillo in Mexico, and now he's up here with the boys in Kansas. And
wow,
don't know where he's going to end up. Gaining experience, and that'll serve him. And so
well, that's what I've learned is if you get pretty proficient in understanding the job and learn the job best you can, and you're polite and good with people, and the door's just open. People want you there, they want your help, and I've seen it happen with a lot of my friends that just get sucked up into great positions because they're just can-do attitudes, and they realize that you have to love this job. It's not like a 9 to 5. You're not going to be an accountant. You're here because you keep your pulse on the landscape. And if you love keeping your pulse on a landscape and walking outside and feeling it and just chasing whatever the day throws at you, you're going to be a really happy rancher, and it's the people who are organized, who try to do a lot of time management and structure their day. All of a sudden they're getting burned out and toasted because cows don't care about your watch, and the water lines are going to break, and you're just going to walk out one day and the fence is going to be down, and you got to be able to just go, yep, thank you, I'll have another, thank you. Thank you, this is going to be fun to fix, I've been meaning to fix that, it fell all the way down. So just having that attitude has really been helpful for me, because owners can come up and just come with something out of the blue they want to do, and I go, let's do it. Yeah, that sounds amazing. We'll figure it out. It's never, if I'm so focused on getting one thing done, it's going to drive you nuts. So that's what I've found.
Yeah. Well, this has been cool. I appreciate you taking time to do this. And
you bet. Hopefully it was helpful for somebody. And
oh yeah, absolutely. We never know how far and wide, the podcast is going to reach. And, we have several people on here live, but podcast, and it goes out on the YouTube channel. So definitely check it out. But talking about, the challenges of ranching, profitability is probably continues to be one of the greatest challenges that we have right now in agriculture, even though we're at record high commodity prices. The other challenge that we see is creating a business that can last for generations. It doesn't die on our watch. And so those are kind of two of the reasons that we started Ag Steward and started doing these podcasts, is that it's great to be regenerative, but man, we've got mortgages to pay and employees to pay and bills to pay that are increasing. So it of necessity has to be profitable. I mean, that's the whole.
Well, and that's what's difficult. Here in California, most ranchers, they're stacked enterprises because the cows alone aren't going to do it. And so just because the cost of doing business here is so high, and property taxes alone will just, for a cow to have to hold up this kind of landscape on terms of property taxes, it's a lot. And so the goal is, and then I'm always structuring for drought. So my plan here is, how do you have a cow-calf operation that can handle 650 pounds to the acre of dry forage versus the 1,200 pounds we have now? Or so I'm knowing that California is going to see about a 2-year rain event, and then it's going to go into 7 years of drought. So I'm looking, my numbers are based on $1.55 a pound for 555 or 550 pound calf, and then it's going to be for drought. So how many head do I need to run to crack that nut, which is, it's a pretty big nut to crack here in terms of, because the entire operation is being asked to be paid for by the cattle, because whatever those stacked enterprises are, they could move away in the future. So the goal is to set up this business model with the cattle ranching in a way that if anything else fails on the stacked enterprise, it can take the hit. And so it has to be able to kind of stand up and do that. And so it's been a long time coming to get there, but we're seeing a lot of daylight in that area. Now it's a matter of just open this ranch up with water resources so we can get more of them, and so it's been really interesting to kind of work that out, because it's an inventory issue now. And then also I'm trying to fluctuate from today's prices. It's great, I can liquidated these animals, but what am I going to have in 5 years when it's $1.55 a pound, and I got to rebuild a herd, and then I got to bring them up here and watch them all fall apart because they're not home cattle. So how do I kind of run that sweet spot? It's been really interesting to try to make that make sense. So slow growth, but it's coming.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. And there's no one recipe that's going to work across any landscape or management style either, right?
Yeah.
But there's certainly some core principles, if abided by, will help you and increase the likelihood and probability of success. So we wanted to talk just briefly about an event that we have coming up, which is going to be actually next week in 4 days. Pretty honored to have some wonderful guests joining us. This is a virtual summit. It's free. It's online. Same format as what we're doing here. We're going to start, I guess, 9 a.m., 4 p.m. approximately. Anyway, here's some of our guest speakers. Joel Salatin's going to be our keynote. We're very grateful to have him, and then others from the regenerative ag space speaking about their own contribution, their own piece to play, and kind of we strive to have a diversity of speakers coming together so that we don't get too siloed in our thinking and maybe stretch our paradigms a little bit. And so you can see up here, there's the link. I'm going to copy it and paste it in the chat here. Anybody who's on this live, they're going to have that for those that are listening to the recording. So that's happening next Tuesday, the 23rd, which this podcast goes out the day before. It's agsteward.co. What is that? You need to find it easier. legacy.agsteward.co/Jared S. will get you there. So we'll put it in the show notes and stuff. And hope you guys can join us for that. Purpose of this is really to create a profitable business now that will be a legacy business for generations to come. A legacy business meaning that, what is legacy? Legacy, I think, is way more than just the business that we run, right? The branch can go away, but it's the lessons that our kids learn. It's the lessons that we learn. It's those things that our neighbors remember about us. It's the things that are engraven on our tombstone. That's the legacy. We choose to do it amongst cattle and grass and the landscape and, in this culture because we love it. And we want to preserve that at Ag Steward. We want to ensure that business can be profitable this year, next year, into the future, and that there's that proper balance that Jeffrey talked about, so we don't face that burnout. And I think those are some of the threats that we're facing. So we're not afraid to talk about those subjects in our webinars and in the summit. Kind of bring a more holistic, well-balanced approach to what we do within regenerative agriculture. So we hope you guys can join us. So with that, we're going to wrap this up officially. And then if whoever wants to stay on for a few minutes, you're welcome to do that. We'll do a little informal discussion, and then we'll go about our chores. But thanks everybody for joining. Hope you can join us again. We do these things live every second and fourth Thursdays of the month. Have great guest speakers like Jeffrey. So Jeffrey, thanks. We appreciate you. Appreciate you being on here tonight.
You bet. I love what you guys are doing. It's fantastic.
Awesome.